Alrighty, guys, welcome back to another episode of the Eco Fight podcast. Today, I have an extremely special guest for everyone. Someone that I just spoke to before and told him that how much he's inspired my life by seeing what his great organization's been able to do. And if you guys haven't heard of them before, I know they're massive over here in Australia, but the Orangutan Project and the founder is Leif Cocks, is it? Welcome to the podcast.
Yes, Leif Cocks. Yeah.
Welcome to the podcast, mate.
Thank you.
Now, I've really been inspired by the background you've been able to take for doing some really amazing things for the planet. But I've read on your website that you've been doing this for around 30 years now. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's been a long journey, and we've still got quite a bit to go. But yeah.
Yeah. And what is it that you guys are actually doing?
Mm-hmm. Our vision as the Orangutan Project is one day all orangutans will live in viable habitats in the wild, in secure populations that can survive the extinction crisis. So in a practical sense, we're trying to concentrate on 8 ecosystems of the right type, shape and size of rainforest, where all the different species and subspecies of orangutans can survive in sustainable populations through this extinction crisis. And unfortunately, we only got another 10 years to achieve this. Otherwise, just like we only got 10 years to achieve significant gains on climate action, we also have the same 10 years to prevent the spiraling to extinction, not only the orangutan, but the rainforest. And those two things are intricately connected.
Yeah, right. Now, you've obviously dedicated a lot of your life towards what it is you're doing and building an organization that can really, truly help. What is it that's driven you to want to do this?
Mm-hmm. Well, it is essentially love and compassion for all living beings. And so obviously I come from a background of studying and working, closely with orangutans for many years. And so it becomes natural, I guess, or sensible to express my love through all beings by concentrating on helping save the orangutans. But because all things are interconnected, saving the orangutans helps save the elephants, the tigers, the biodiversity, the rainforest, the indigenous communities we're working with. And most of all, it's saving the planet through conserving rainforest and eventually rewilding it. So everyone on the planet will benefit from the actions that we're undertaking.
Yeah, wow. Now, what are the main countries that your project's happening in?
Mm-hmm. Orangutans are found in the wild only in 2 countries, Indonesia and Malaysia, on the islands of Borneo and Sumatra. Yeah. And because orangutans are persons, they don't do too well in captivity, just as human persons don't do too well in captivity. And also, zoo populations of megafauna are all unsustainable and collapse. So zoos can't save elephants, tigers, bears, gorillas, orangutans. So the only place to work for orangutan conservation and welfare in the wild. And so I often say it may be difficult to save orangutans in the wild, but it's impossible to save them any other place.
Yeah, wow. And I think I've done a fair bit of study, or probably nowhere near as much as you, obviously, but study on understanding the orangutans and what's actually happening with the deforestation, especially in Borneo. But can you kind of explain to me what's happening and how or why we only have 10 years left to actually really eradicate this?
Yeah. They've lost 80% of the habitat. And the major driver has been the destruction of their rainforest, and it's been converted to unsustainable forms of monocultures. And all monocultures are unsustainable by their very nature, such as palm oil, pulp paper, and rubber plantations. And this is slowly driven to extinction. And of course, those plantations seek the fertile lowland and riverine soil where orangutans need in order to survive. They can't survive solely in the highland areas, where most of the forest remains. And so this double whammy of not only taking forest, but taking the forests that they particularly need is caused the double-edged sword. But of course, as the rainforest disappears, it creates floods, it creates droughts, it raises temperature, reduces the productivity of the remaining forest, increases the chance and the intensity of fires, and it makes orangutans available for illegal activities such as hunting and poaching. And so you get these spirals into extinction through these mechanisms. And of course, one of the significant things is destroying the rainforest is one of the most stupid things that we can do to increase climate change. And in return, the rainforest is affected by climate change with greater, longer droughts because increasing El Nino events. And a lot of orangutan habitat is doomed, being these lowland peat swamps, is to be under sea level as sea level rises. So you get these feedback loops, which makes the orangutan far more vulnerable than we would first expect. And lastly, what makes them extremely vulnerable is the slowest reproducing species in the world. For example, the Smarten orangutan had its first baby at 15, and there's 9 years between individual infants. So they can't recover and bounce back like most other species. And so if you only kill 1% of the females in the population, which is totally viable, every year, then that population will still spiral into extinction. And so this is why, it is so important to make direct, meaningful action now, because it's all interconnected and it's all urgent. Because maybe if we don't pull this off the next years, yes, there'll be some rainforest, but the rainforest is doomed. Yes, there'll be orangutans, but those populations will basically inbreed into extinction. And so it's not about whether the last tree will happen in another lifetime or the last orangutan, but we will be handing over to future generations a recoverable planet, recoverable ecosystems for both the economy and the environment in countries such as Indonesia, and the ability for orangutan population to survive generation to generation in coming years.
Yeah. Now, the question of the importance of rainforest is definitely not something that people are asking when it comes to the amount of emissions that it can, and the importance of rainforests for the environment. But what is the underlying importance that, I know that in the ocean, we talk about if we were to lose sharks, that would completely throw off the ecosystem. What's, apart from the fact of losing orangutans, because they are so close to being human form, what is the other big impact that it's going to have?
Well, one we know is the more biodiverse a forest is, the more carbon it stores. So it becomes more valuable. As you reduce the biodiversity, even though that forest is intact, you reduce its carbon storage. Yeah. In additionally, there's two major sources of destruction of our marine habitats. One is the meat industry, and the other one is fertilizer runoff from the unsustainable monocultures such as palm oil, who use fertilizer to temporarily sustain the agricultural systems until its eventual collapse. All that ends up in the river. And so, around these ecosystems, because you have these unsustainable forms of management of the land, you're also destroying the oceans and stuff around it. So they're all interconnected. And of course, there's a feedback loop. As you destroy the oceans, you destroy the weather cycles, and therefore you actually destroy the rainforest in itself. And so there's no getting away anymore of a lack of and not understand interconnectivity of all living beings and all ecosystems in all countries. And so our tribal brain of defending our own tribe and our own area and locality is unfortunately a way of thinking which is no longer reasonable or acceptable, and no longer can get us out of this problem.
Yeah. I would love to know, on the back of that, you speak so so evenly about all of the problems? Because I think you've just been so educated on all of this stuff, especially that comes from being 30 years in the industry. But what are some of the biggest challenges the organization has faced over the last 30 years?
The biggest challenge and what's stopping us achieving our maximum capacity is lack of funds.
Yeah.
So, I always talk, I got a $5 million a year organization and $20 million a year problem. The good news is if we can get that $20 million a year for 10 years, we're going to leave these ecosystems not only environmentally, but economically self-sustainable with the local communities. Because we're developing agricultural systems under rainforest canopies such as shade vanilla, shade coffee, shade cocoa, jungle honey as some examples. And so we know from the business models, we can hand over these ecosystems so they can run themselves, protect themselves, and the indigenous community become wealthy and prosperous, all while saving biodiversity and environment. So there's this huge win-win situation for the globe, the local people. It's only the rich multinationals who pass a true cost of production onto the powerless by taking away environmental services, destroying the planet for the future, displacing indigenous communities. And they're profiting at the expense of the many. So they're not, the only reason they're profitable is because they pass that true cost of production onto the powerless, which include orangutans. And we're developing economic models which are actually better, provide more income, more economic growth for a country, but it doesn't concentrate the wealth and export that wealth, let's say outside of Indonesia, back to the Western countries, which is the typical neo-colonial model, which has been destroying and raping the old colonial states, for many years. So it's also about economic and national justice. As well as recognizing of indigenous rights. And so all those things, as well as, of course, women's rights, because women are often the key to conservation because they're much more knowledgeable. And so we do a lot of this work empowering women within communities, as well as educating, feeding children. All these things are intertwined in the process. So $20 million a year, that's our goal. And so we're struggling to get that because at the same time, the problems are increasing because of COVID. COVID has also reduced our income. And there's cracks in the framework, but what most countries are trying to do is double down on the old destructive elements, using supporting their old corporate funders in the fossil fuel industry by a gas-led recovery, based on no science and those sorts of stuff. But there's cracks coming in there now where they can no longer hide and no longer keep destroying the environment, hoarding wealth, and not making the countries prosperous. So those cracks are starting to show, but we're in a race against time. So as those cracks are showing, at the same time, the problems are becoming more intense. So, basically, in some ways, you can look at what's happening in America now and go, well, if one millionaire decided not to have planned space for 10 minutes, we could save orangutans. If another millionaire decided not to do that, we can save these 8 ecosystems, and pass on to future generations. So from a realistic perspective of wealth, it's available in the world. We have the capacity to do that, but it's hoarded. It's hoarded by a few who don't necessarily understand or share the values to allow that money to be accessed for the good of everybody on the planet.
Yeah. Now, in the day-to-day of what you guys are doing, I think it might have changed after COVID hit, but prior to COVID, what's the day-to-day look like with working with the actual orangutans?
I mean, working with orangutans is one of the most wonderful things. And, I always say I work for orangutans. I don't work with orangutans. I just happen to, come from a background of working closely with orangutans, raising them as babies when they're sick, having friendships with them, and eventually, taking them back on the journey to be free in the wild. And so that's a privilege that I've had in my life. And because orangutans are in many ways, although the person's just the same as us, they're just not recognized because of prejudice called speciesism. Just as there's still racism, there's still the unrecognized prejudice, speciesism against intelligent persons that share our planet, such as orangutans. But more importantly, to the point I'm making, is they're a more noble form of person. That they don't have that aggressive kill switch that humans do. Humans are capable of most empathy, love, and compassion, but of so much horror and destruction, and destruction of fellow human beings. Orangutans don't have that kill switch. They will not willfully kill like that. And the analogy I give to demonstrate this is, over the last century, probably killed over 1 million orangutans as we slowly destroyed their habitat and hunting them to extinction. And they're 7 times stronger than a human being, and the males have canines just like a tiger. But in not one case in captivity, zoo, sanctuary, or in the wild has orangutan ever killed a human being. So they don't have that ability to see another person and want to destroy them, for the mere sake of cruelty, which unfortunately us as humans, we innately have this capacity, which comes out as we see with war crimes and genocide, almost on a habitual basis.
Now, I think that you will be able to answer this question, but I want to know personally one of the most beautiful experiences that you've ever had with an orangutan. Because I remember the first time I ever spent time with one, and it was the most magical thing, but it was very sad for me because it was in a zoo in Bali and it was drugged up, and it was very sad for me to see it like that. And I've never actually been able to go and see one in the wild and see it naturally be able to prosper. But I would love to know the most beautiful time you've encountered one.
I guess there's 2 times which might be worth highlighting. I've had the privilege of being with orangutans many times when they're giving birth. And in fact, I filmed the first birth of an orangutan many years ago, and you can see that on YouTube. And but each time, because I've been friends with the mother, within 24 hours of the birth, the mother takes the baby's hand and makes it hold my finger. And so it connects me with that baby orangutan, this beautiful little soul that has, is hours old. And that certainly is a wonderful experience. And the fact that it is repeated, every time with a different mother, it just shows you how that loving and how they like to connect, and even, and especially with their little babies. The second one was 3 years after I released an orangutan into the wild, took her through the journey in the wild, in the rainforest. I saw her in the forest, and she came down, and we held hands momentarily. But before that, she was coming from a captive environment, born in a zoo, and she relied on myself and the knowledgeable Indonesian technicians to educate her learners through their journey. But this was the first time that she was totally independent, and so there was no pretense of need, or requirement, that we could spend some time together, as 2 equal beings connecting in the rainforest. If people are more interested in these things, I've written several books: Orangutans, My Cousins, My Friends, and Finding Our Humanity. The latest book tells a lot of these stories about the wonderful experience I've had with these persons of the forest.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, I would love to know a little bit more about the organization and is it volunteers you guys have, or who is it that's working and helping at the moment?
Well, there's 2 sides. There's the charity raising money, and we have chapters in New Zealand, Netherlands, UK, Canada, US, and Australia. And each one of those has the boards and which are working diligently to raise funds. And of course, we have many wonderful volunteers who are doing events on stalls, dedicating their time and effort to raise money for the orangutans and the beautiful stuff. So there's a whole network of concerned people all over the world contributing to this vision that we have in the orangutan project, that one day all orangutans live in the wild in secure habitat. On the flip side of that, we have many partners and foundations and companies that we help form, and brave young Indonesians who are day in, day out working in a forest, forming rescue teams, rescuing orangutans, and doing all that work. And there's a whole network, of hundreds of these often young and brave Indonesians who are helping save the rainforest, save orangutans, and for not only for the orangutans, but for their country, for the whole of humanity. And so there's two sides to my job, dealing with wonderful people on each side, trying to raise the resources possible and helping support those who are enacting the on-the-ground work on a daily basis to make that vision come true.
Yeah, wow. Now, I've seen that you guys do a lot of work with, or you've just started doing work with elephants and tigers as well. What's happening there?
Yeah, that's important because, as I started off, this is about compassion for all living beings. And the idea normally is, look, you say we call orangutan an umbrella species. So, for example, the concept is if we save the orangutans in these ecosystems, all the gibbons and the monkeys and the reptiles, and if they'll come on for the free ride, we don't have to have the Sumatran beetle project. It will survive in the forest if the orangutans survive. But what we found that two species were slipping outside of the umbrella. Elephants were now separated in these small herds throughout the country, and because both elephants and the local community have lost their land due to the big multinational, they're fighting and killing each other to survive in the remaining lowland forest where only both can survive. And criminal syndicates were coming specifically to poach the tigers for the illegal medicine trade, and so we thought, so we started the International Tiger Project, International Elephant Project, to address these specific issues and bring those two species under the umbrella of our conservation efforts.
Yeah, fantastic. And I'd love to know a little bit more about some of the successes that you guys have had, or even just personally, you over the last nearly 30 years in this industry.
Mm-hmm. We have the long-term and the short-term successes, and conservation is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And so it's a long-term, arduous journey. And so it's not for a quick soundbite and go home. It's something we have to stick at for many, many years in order to achieve the outcome in the time frame that we got. So there's two things. For example, we've formed companies which is now leasing live tracts of rainforest. We're supporting the reintroduction and reestablishment of extinct orangutan populations. In the areas where the children are starving because they can't find enough nutrition because of the traditional lands are gone, we're feeding the children and working with the women to develop kitchens and hunter-gathering within the forest to bring these products to market. So many things like that. We are building new rescue centres to allow the authorities to continue confiscating orangutans and getting them back into the reintroduction programs. And that leads on to, along the way, we have many wonderful opportunities where we can help individual orangutans, save them from being killed and eaten and help them to live once again free in the wild. And many, many years ago, when I first started, conservation said, don't worry about the individual orangutans. That's a welfare issue, but it's not a conservation issue. Just concentrate on saving the wild orangutans, which is most important. Although I never bought into that dichotomy of win-lose. It's a win-win situation. But certainly we know at the moment, because we have a critically endangered species, every individual is important for the survival of the species. So every individual orangutan that we can save this month not only save that individual from a lifetime of horror, but it also helps contribute to the overall goal of saving species.
Yeah. Orangutans, you mentioned before that they're very, very human-like. Can you explain to me how human-like they are and the kind of intelligence that they show?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, intelligence is actually often a dumb idea for evolution. I just quickly explain that. For us sitting here, 80% of our energy is supporting this large brain. And so we have to get a lot of calories to support this large brain. So if this large brain ain't finding those calories, you're using up all the calories and not getting anywhere. And so a species don't become intelligent without good reason. Otherwise it'll go extinct. And so therefore we all have developed intelligence in a different way. An orangutan may be a dunce in a classroom, but a genius in a rainforest. So, for example, its temporal spatial map of where the food is and exists and when it fruits over multiple years is far more precise and accurate than a human can do. So they're intelligent in that way. We're intelligent in another way. Another example is we tend to often learn things from trial and error, especially men. We learn using our hands for trial and error. And what orangutans do, they have this large cerebral cortex, which is basically a computer simulator, and they'll sit there and just run simulations. If I do this, well, what will the result? No, do this, do the result. And then I act once and do it once. Yeah. And that's why, what you're I guess the analogy is of all the great apes, if you give a gorilla a screwdriver, he'll scratch himself with it. They're kind of like the sports scholarships of the great apes. Well, they're not that bright. A lot of monkeys are smarter than gorillas. They're not dumb, but they're not, exceptionally smart. And I won't tell you what a bonobo does with a screwdriver, because they're kind of like the hippies of the great ape world. Chimpanzees, being aggressive and warlike us, will throw the screwdriver at another chimpanzee, but an orangutan will escape. And so, for example, one of the things they do is, because they're persons suffer more than other living beings, because we have worries about the future and anxieties about the past. We project ourselves in past and future, and suffer more greatly than the particular circumstances of the time. And so I know orangutans, who try to fool you because they think ahead and they hide things, if they feel that what you want is different to them. But one of the great examples, orangutans have big cheek pouches, the big mouths. It's basically a megaphone. And they have a throat sac, which gives this very long call vibration, low tone vibration that really can penetrate the rainforest. And they have the cheek pads, it's basically a megaphone, they're pointed. And what they do at night is they go, future me is going to get up and move this way tomorrow morning. And what I want to do is signal to all the females I'm there, and I want to signal all the males I'm there, because I want them to go away and the females to come to me. And so they'll call in that direction the night before. They project themselves in the future to plan into the future. And that's why they don't do too well in captivity, because persons don't, because even in refugee camps, even if they're run by well-intended people and they're there for good reason to protect them, the psychological damage of people long-term housing in refugee camps is well known, because we need control over who, when, and how often we interact, and we need to be able to control our future, and manage our anxiety as part. We can't do that in captivity, and orangutans can't do that. And that's why orangutans don't simply live as long in captivity, because that long-term stress destroys their immune system and makes them susceptible to disease. And orangutans live a lot longer in the wild, where of course they belong.
How long do they live in the wild?
We actually don't know to a greater extent, because there's orangutans, when we first started studying maybe 45 years ago, are still there, but what we know, because there's the slow reproduction, they must at least live into early 60s for the population to survive. So it's one of those things, they're such a long-lived species, but the time we've been studying them, since the early 70s is so short. So we're really only discovering that. But we do know that they statistically, they still live a lot longer than they do in captivity, which is pretty horrific how short they do live in captivity, except for a few rare individuals. But we're not quite sure how long they will actually live once we see the first orangutans studied reaching old age.
Yeah. Now, I've seen the statistic in Borneo, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's around 70% of the rainforest in Borneo that's been destroyed. Is that around right?
Yeah. I normally use it 80%, but it's near enough to the ballpark to get the message across.
Now, I watched a few things about tracking orangutans down and trying to find them in the wild to start to study them. Is that becoming more and more difficult because the numbers are getting smaller? Talk to me about how the numbers have dropped in orangutans over the last 10 to 15 years.
Well, they've plummeted. So with 80% of rainforest habitat, that's 80% of orangutans are gone.
Wow.
So, we often have this kind of naive perception of biology. I once visited a friend in Canada, and they cleared some land, for a farm. And I said, what happened to the animals that wanted land? Oh, they just went further back into the forest. Yeah, but of course, that's not what happens. All species produce more offspring than can survive. That's how they grow and whatever. And you're not going to just simply die if you can survive in any way possible. So very quickly, every ecosystem is full of orangutans to the brink, full of tigers, to the maximum that ecosystem can carry. So once you do that, you take some rainforest away, those orangutans have to die, or another orangutan have to die. But it's kind of worse than that, because what happens is female orangutans live all their lives in a particular territory. And their idea is, if anything goes wrong, I'm just going to sit here and wait till things get better. That's their strategy. And that has worked over millennia as the best strategy for female orangutan. Males, on the other hand, strategy, things are pretty bad here, I'm just going to go away and go somewhere else. So what happens is, a traditional thing that you'll see is they're destroying the forest, and there'll be last female orangutans sitting in the trees by themselves with their babies, and then the poachers will get them, and destroy them and take their babies. The males are gone. But what is happening is the remaining forest is not only full of the orangutans that were there in the first place, but it's also full of all these males escaping destruction, and basically eating all the food and competing against the females and the babies trying to survive and get enough food in hyperdensities. So you get these kind of, additionalities, which make the problems a lot worse. But orangutans have always been difficult to study. They live 40 meters in the air in a semi-solitary environment. And if they don't want to be seen, they're very good, very cryptic of hiding in the natural rainforest. And so most orangutan researchers have crooked necks looking up, So it's far more romantic and easier to study more ground-living apes like gorillas and chimpanzees, orangutans less so. But I'll spend a lot of time watching orangutans on my back with my poncho rainforest on the forest floor, looking up and watching them about going through their day. Eating, feeding, and interacting with other orangutans.
It back to when you originally decided to start the orangutan project. What is it that you were doing prior to that?
Mm-hmm. At the time, I was a zookeeper, and I had 15 orangutans that I was looking after. And one of the things which was unique into where I was working, I started going in with them. Normally it's like, oh my God, here's an orangutan, here's a cage, don't get close, they're dangerous and that sort of stuff. I mean, but no one ever told me this. So I just went in and started having my lunch with them and working with them. And that's a totally different way of interacting with a person, than through bars. And so I quickly became friends with them and got to know them very well. And discovered that they're self-aware persons, the most intelligent being on the planet. And the scientific research have told us these are the most intelligent being on the planet which shares us, and the self-aware persons. And of course, then they don't belong. The obvious answer is they don't belong in captivity. Then the obvious realization is, okay, they need to go back to the wild, but the wild is disappearing. They've been slaughtered into extinction in the wild. And so that really started the Orangutan Project as a way of solving this issue, both from a conservation perspective, but from a welfare perspective, to see those individuals, and if not them, their offspring, all again being free in the wild, living in their own cultures and societies for forever.
Yeah. And did you ever go to university or study orangutans in a traditional form, or?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. While working with them, I wanted to know more about them, and learn more about them. So I did my postgraduate diploma after my biology degree in primate behavior, and I did my master's studying orangutans. Then every holidays I used to go up into and work and see with orangutans, help rescue orangutans, getting that on-hand practical experience. So I used the university framework of Curtin University and the wonderful lecturer called George Newland to provide the support I needed to become a scientist, to learn more about it. So I wasn't a scientist who decided to study orangutans. I was somebody who loved orangutans, who in part became a scientist, started writing papers in peer-reviewed journals, and became a conservationist, helping rescue them in the wild and working with conservation organizations as an intelligent expression of the love that I had for these beautiful persons.
Yeah, wow. Now, if you don't mind me asking, I would love to ask a few questions based around how you've built the organization, because I have a fair few viewers that watch this podcast that are very focused on starting their own organizations and non-for-profits to really help in different areas. But I think it's obviously changed so drastically since you started. I believe you started in 1998, was it?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
If you had advice for people that were starting an organization today, what would you kind of say to them?
Don't put the cart before the horse. In a sense, is if your idea is you want to start an organization, well, why do you want to start an organization? I heard this great talk by a guy who started TED Talks. He said the first thing is, have you got something to say? People often come, I want to do a TED Talk because I want to do a TED Talk because I think it'd be really cool and be good for my career. Well, have you got something to say? Or have you got something to give? Have you got a gift to give people? If not, don't do it. So, and of course, there's all these NGOs fighting over the same dollar, the same habitat, and actually they fight more amongst each other than they do people destroying the forest, because their sense of self-esteem, money, name, fame, reputation is based on competing against others which seek the same thing. And so you get these perverse outcomes, because the nature of the human tribal mind, is too restrictive for the problem. So so what I would say is, first of all, let's collectivize together and work together to achieve the outcome. However, sometimes what happens is, and that's genuinely why you should start at your own NGO. You see a gap that's needed, no one's doing it. You know, this organization is doing this organization is doing that, and they're great, and I support them, but there's a huge gap here. You know, no one's doing it, and someone needs to fill it. That's when you stand up and say, look, I'm going to start my own organization and fill this gap. And that's a genuine reason. That the organization is only a vehicle, you know, to achieve the outcome. Otherwise, it becomes destructive. I often say to people, you know, my greatest day in my life is when the Orangutan project closes down. Because I don't want to create a world where we need a orangutan conservation organization to save orangutans in the rainforest. I'm going to create a world where that's not needed.
Yeah.
You know, and I always say to my board every, at the annual general meeting, I don't give a crap about this organization. It's only a vehicle for me to achieve and collectivize with all you lovely people to save orangutans. Never put it before the cause.
That's
if another organization can do it better, give them money. If the other organization, give them this support. We just fill in the gaps. We become the glue that fills in the gaps to make it happen. I'm not shying against name, fame, reputation, and money. We get those things and we use them for good use, but often they become the primary subconscious driver for many people. And that becomes a destructive element which inhibits conservation and other charities from achieving the ultimate good that we seek to do in society.
Yeah. That's an awesome way to outlook at it, though, like that you actually don't want to be running this organization, because once you close it down, that means that you've succeeded, which I think is a really beautiful way to look at it. I'd love to know what the future looks like for what you're doing, though. Like, I know if we do succeed and we get all the stuff we need, what's the next 10 years look like? What's the next 20 years look like?
I think we've got 10 years to solve the issue. And just as climate scientists tell us, we've got 10 years to turn this around. And obviously, as I mentioned, those things are interlinked. So in the next 10 years, given enough support from people, we're going to save 8 ecosystems of the right type, shape, and size of forest of a minimum of 200,000 hectares each, where orangutans, elephants, and tigers, and then can live in sustainable numbers. Work with indigenous communities to develop agricultural systems under the rainforest canopy so they and their children can prosper. And leave these ecosystems not only environmentally, but economically self-sustainable to pass on to future generations, and become the biological resource which we can start rewilding the planet. And we know we have to rewild about 28% of the land surface in order for this planet to survive. But we have to provide the biological resource for that rewilding. And we intend to have these ecosystems to form that basis. So we probably can't hand over to future generations a better planet than we had when we were born. But what we intend to do with this is to hand over future generations a planet that can be recovered. And that's our goal. And what I always tell everybody is, we are living in the most important decade of human history. This decade will determine whether the species and the planet will survive. That's a great privilege. We can be born at any other time, any other decade, we would have lived, and you go, well, we live and die. What we do really probably doesn't matter. We're just one of the millions that come and die this generation. And what we have to realize is the vast majority of people don't have the wealth or power or influence to make a difference. All the people who are in poverty and in extreme poverty, they can't make a difference. They're just lucky to have a meal, lucky to get a shelter, they're lucky to educate their children. So out of all the people who have privilege of living in this critical time where we can make such a difference, there's only a small amount of us that have the capacity, doesn't make sense, and therefore the obligation, to do whatever we can to turn this around. And so this is a great gift to us, in many ways, hey, come on, you can really do something special. We can express love intelligently in such a fashion that we can make such a big difference to so many living beings. And so it's a wonderful opportunity to live a life of meaning if we're willing to take that up, and if we're willing to collectivize together in a selfless cause to save every living being, every species, which are all interconnected, to leave behind a recoverable planet for future generations.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, I don't know if you can see behind me, we've got a massive thunderstorm that's happening behind. I've got the rain hitting the window at the moment. It sounds like there's a bit of hail coming down, but it's probably the best backdrop I've had apart from the sunset, but it's very beautiful. I would love to ask, just to be respectful of your time, where people can help you financially, donate, and then if people have a bigger calling and they want to come and volunteer their time, where they and how they can do that as well.
Yeah, I mean, they can come to our website, theorangutanproject.org, and they can donate. You can save for us, you can adopt an orangutan, give a donation to support the causes. If you haven't got much money, become a small regular giver. That's important to keep the money flowing to keep the wages of the young Indonesians in the field, doing the hard work and putting their lives on the line. If you're a major donor, give a major gift, and we can save tracts of forest, with relatively economically, maximum impact for the income. And some people may be money rich, but money poor, but time rich. And we have a wonderful network of volunteers, in this case, all over Australia, and waiting for COVID restrictions to release them to go out and run stalls and fundraising events, and use their time to make a real significant difference in the world.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, the final question I have for you is, I would love to know some of the most famous or some of the most influential people that have ever come and helped the Orangutan Project.
I don't know too many really famous people. So I don't have a.
That's all right. That's all right.
I don't have a big list. I guess the only classic example I have is the world's most famous primatologist, Jane Goodall. I met her and I helped her paint a painting with an orangutan, which they auctioned off for her organization. So that's probably my closest touch of fame, I guess.
Jane Goodall's a beautiful lady.
But luckily,
she's Jane Goodall is a beautiful lady. I've seen some of the stuff she does with monkeys, and it's just fantastic.
A wonderful, peaceful soul. But I guess the other point is fame and wealth and success is not evenly distributed. Not everyone has same access to opportunity. We're privileged and lucky sometimes to get the opportunity to gain some of those things. I guess the point I'm making, some of the most wonderful people, like I was, doing this lectures for this school to train young Indonesians in environmental activism and whatever. Oh my God, I met so many beautiful people, beautiful young Indonesians, who are so dedicated and truthful, and concerned about others and the environment. So, that beauty, we live in kind of a fame culture, and some beautiful people like Jane do become famous, but it's not necessarily a good measure, I guess. But my real privilege is to meet, some of those unfamous people, wonderful people doing great work, and sometimes, they die, literally, as rangers and that sort of stuff, protecting the forest, and making the ultimate sacrifice for what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, Fantastic. Well, Leif, I want to thank you so much for your time today. And I've really appreciated talking to you. It's really beautiful to just get a bit of a more understanding and be able to share that with our audience. So, guys, I want to thank you so much for listening to this episode of the podcast. And make sure you go over. And if you can't donate financially, please make sure you go over and support and share the content they are so that more eyes can see them. But if you can make a small, a large, or any sort of donation, make sure you can. And if you want to reach out to them, they're very forthcoming in talking. So thank you so much for listening, guys. And thank you and goodbye. And I'll see you on the next episode.